Welcome to Sahuarita. If you are from out of town, you probably think you're in Green Valley. You're not in Green Valley, you're in Sahuarita. It has a Green Valley mailing address, but Quail Creek is in our town, and we love it. My name is Dan Shear. I'm the editor of the Green Valley News and the Sahuarita Sun. And sometimes when we do these things, we overlook people. So if you're important, could you raise your hand? See, I know you're not going to. Okay, so I really want to thank the sponsors for today's forum. I think it's important to get out here and to listen to the candidates, hear it straight from them. I want to introduce our moderator. He is a no he's not. He's a longtime Southern Arizona journalist. He's probably, it's a lifetime. I don't think he's going to leave. And I can tell you that among his peers, he is very well respected by his fellow journalists. He is the editor of the Tucson Weekly, and he wears a lot of hats for Tucson local media. Let's welcome Jim Nitzel.
Let's get this show on the road. Without further ado, let's introduce our candidates. We did a coin flip. Steve Farley won, so he's coming out first. Steve Farley, State Senator, candidate for governor. And David Garcia, the ASU education professor, as well as the former candidate for Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction. Welcome to both of you. And we're going to allow you a 2-minute opening statement, and we will start with Steve Farley.
Well, thank you. Are you guys pumped up for change? Well, let me tell you, you're going to be more pumped up for change after this forum today, because I will tell you, I have been all over the state since I announced in June. And the energy is everywhere, more than I've ever seen it. We have tripled the number of Democratic Precinct Committee people across the state since November. People are showing up like they've never showed up before. As depressed as we all were last November. The good news is complacency died. Everyone is aware there are democracies at stake in this state of Arizona and in our country. So nobody's staying home this election. This is the one we win. Now, Steve Farley in 90 seconds. Many of you know me. I've been coming down here to Green Valley, Sahuarita for probably 15 years. Probably started with my transportation advocacy. You may remember I worked for 15 years to get the modern streetcar in downtown Tucson in place, and you see what's happened down there. I was also the guy who was the chief spokesperson and helped put together and work with people like Dick Roberts and the Green Valley Coordinating Council to create a region-wide transportation plan called the Regional Transportation Authority, the RTA. Then I was the chief spokesperson, and in 2006, we passed that election, 60-40, for the first time in 40 years of trying. That created jobs, and it demonstrated my ability to work across the aisle. I'm also the guy that did those murals downtown, those big black and white photo murals of people walking down the street. I've run my own business for 26 years. But more importantly, for almost a quarter century, I've been a dad. I've got two amazing daughters who went to Tucson public schools. My youngest daughter just graduated from Tucson High, number 18, the class of 755. And particularly in those last 4 years, I've seen the devastation wrought by this governor and this legislature for our public school system, and that must stop. I'm running for governor, and I'm going to win, and I need your support. Thank you.
All right. Now, David Garcia, 2 minutes. Open statement.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. My name's David Garcia, and folks, I'm in this to win in 18, but more than that, I'm in this to change Arizona so that we never come back as a state. We turn blue and never come back. That is our plan. That's what we're working on my campaign. It's not about winning every once in a while when we have a weak candidate on the other side. It's about building a coalition in Arizona that can win over and over and over again. And that's the purpose of this. At ASU, I'm a statistics professor. And so I have run the numbers, and the numbers are out there to win, folks. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this thing. And that is our plan, is to get that done. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a native Arizonan, born and raised. 4th generation Arizonan. I'm a product of Arizona's public schools. I'm from Mesa. My dad was a commercial painter. My mom worked in a factory. I know what it's like to be in a working class family and to struggle. My path forward was through the military. I joined the Army when I was 17. Went to basic training at 17, and I was 11 Bravo, for those military veterans out there. For those of you that don't know, it's your standard infantryman. My job was to carry an F-16 and walk, and that experience turned me around. I took high school over again, came back, did much better. I am a Sun Devil. My wife is a Wildcat, so we're well represented in our household. And I had the privilege of getting a PhD from the University of Chicago. I've come back. I was Associate Superintendent for the state of Arizona. For the last 12 years, I've had the real privilege of being an educator, something that I enjoy a lot. But in 2012, I was sick and tired of watching what was going on, devastating public education. Public education is our best invention, folks. It is the difference. It is what I'm living it. I look at what my daughters have versus myself, and the difference is education. And so we ran to win in 14. We got this close, and we're ready to take that up another notch and not only do things for education, but for all of Arizona as well. Thank you.
So we're going to start out here with a quick lightning round. I'm just going to ask you gentlemen to raise your hands if you agree with me.
Solemnly swear.
Solemnly swear that you agree with these positions. Do you support the referendum that will reverse the recently passed law that dramatically expanded vouchers in Arizona?
That's all. Okay.
That's it? All right.
Making it easy.
Do you support ending the practice of diverting road dollars to other areas of the state budget? Easy. Do you believe human activity is driving climate change?
That's not a laugh line in Republican debates.
Do you believe the state must do more to combat climate change? Do you support expanding subsidies for solar energy as part of a plan to combat climate change? Do you support cutting back on the state's contracts with private prisons? Funding to Pima Community College. All right.
Thank you very much, folks. Have a good day. We got more?
A few more. These are where you actually get to talk. And we'll start with you, David. On a general question, why do you think you would make the strongest candidate to best serve Arizona?
That's a good question. We're going to make the strongest candidate, folks, because we are in the best position to win. That's the reason. As Democrats, we talk a lot about policy, but more what we need to, in my opinion, spend time and energy on is winning. And let me give you the formula to get that done. We are seeing brand new energy. We are seeing Democrats step up, and I think that's wonderful. But the truth is, that's coming from the outside in. It's coming because folks are running away from Trump. We have a unique opportunity. When I said turn Arizona blue and not turn back, here's the way we do it. We take that energy and we bank it, because it's going to come our way or it's not, but it's more organic and it's from the outside. And then we go out to brand new communities that are disengaged right now and get them on board. This is how California turned blue. California turned blue with a reliable voter, progressive base, and then they got Latinos to come out in big numbers, and folks, Trump hasn't stepped foot in California, I don't think, since the election. It is that exact same formula we need here in Arizona. We add to our energy by going out to disengage voters. And let me tell you what those voters are looking for. They're not policy wonks. Policy starts to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, wonk, wonk. For them, they're looking for a connection, somebody that shares their story, somebody that they can connect with. And for us, we bring those folks on board, and I'll tell you that's what my campaign is about. To give you a good example, we have 1,200 people that are volunteering on my campaign, our campaign, right now. 1,200. 290 came on board in October alone. It is young energy, it is diverse energy, it's the future of Arizona. And when we get those folks out to vote, that's when we flip Arizona and we don't come back, folks. So that's first and foremost, Jim, is we're in a great position to not only win, but build a base that we can govern and turn Arizona around.
Well, thank you. I have won 6 campaigns in a row, and I've been in the legislature for 11 years, serving on some of the most important committees they are. And I happen to believe that actually people do want policy wonks. They want policy wonks that can win and then create change once they're in office. Because it's time that we had somebody who knew what they were doing and created good policy based on their experience and expertise about all different aspects of policy. Governor Ducey certainly isn't doing that. He's good at reading talking points. And they're written for him by his PR guy, and the policy is created by his chief of staff, who is the same guy that funneled the Koch brothers' money to create his campaign. That's not the way we ought to govern Arizona. In the legislature, I've served 6 years in the House, 5 years in the Senate so far. I'm the assistant minority leader in the Senate. I serve on the Budget Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and I serve on the Finance Committee. And when people's eyes glaze over about finances, that's when the theft happens. Every single week in that Finance Committee, I see the theft and they call it out. We need somebody who understands where the bodies are buried, who understands what the budget is about, and who understands that when Governor Ducey says that we don't have the money to pay for education, he's lying. We have the money, we've chosen to give it away to large out-of-state corporations. I know where that money is hiding. I know that we can get that money because I've worked across the aisle to be able to get it done. We need in a governor somebody not only who can win, and I will win, but somebody who understands what Ducey is up to and what it takes to roll it back. Somebody who understands how the legislature works and how to get things through in a bipartisan way. And somebody who can turn on everybody all over the state to the idea that Arizona can be better. That we don't have to be a joke on late night television, we can be a light unto the nation, and that's why I'm running.
How would you approach the problem of encouraging teachers to stay in Arizona?
This is our biggest crisis, and we have not faced a crisis this severe, I would argue, in our entire history as a state. We have 1,300 teacher vacancies across the state right now. 526 teachers have left in the first month of the school year. There are now doubled up classrooms, and there are classrooms being taught by full-time substitutes without credentials. How do we expect to have a future if our children are dealing with a schooling situation like that? They can't put their education on hold while we wait. We have to invest in schools now, and the reason teachers are leaving is because they can't afford to teach anymore. We're 50th in the country in average school salaries. 50th. It would take a 7% raise to get to 49th. But we have the money. We can eliminate, there's $13.7 billion in corporate sales tax loopholes that we give away every year. $13.7 billion with a B. Our entire general fund is $9.5 billion. Everything we spend on as a state. If we can eliminate $3 billion out of those $13.7 billion, we can lower the sales tax rate while increasing education funding by $2 billion a year. And let me tell you, teacher raises, 20% teacher raises, would only cost $750 million a year. We have the money to invest in our education system. We don't have to keep stealing money from our roads, from our gas taxes that are supposed to be spent on roads. And we can actually create a public option in healthcare here in Arizona if DC punts. We have the money to do all these things. We have to stop giving it away to special interests in corporate tax loopholes that make no sense, like we pay sales tax on a 3-inch pipe, but not on 4-inch pipe, simply because Southwest Gas can afford to buy a lobbyist to go to the legislature and get themselves a break. With our money, we pay them every month. That's not the way we operate here in Arizona, or should operate. It's how things will change once I'm governor. We will fund the teacher salaries, we will fund our schools so the roofs aren't collapsing, and we have the money to pay for it while lowering taxes.
It comes down to this, folks. We need to treat teachers as professionals. And it's two parts. Number one, we need to pay them as professionals. Right now, we look at teachers as missionaries. We say they love the kids. They would do this out of the goodness of their hearts. And as a result, we have a profession that is unsustainable. You cannot raise a family alone on a teacher's salary. And so first and foremost, we need to pay teachers and to make sure that they are paid as the professionals that we value. And yes, that is extremely important. Number of ways to do that. But second, which is equally important, we've got to let them teach. Right now, we have an obsession with standardized testing, folks. And what that means is we have reduced teaching and learning down to answering multiple choice questions. And there are no multiple choices in life. The more we prepare students for multiple choice questions, the less prepared they are for life after high school. And so my vision is to reduce our reliance on multiple choice testing, standardized testing, let teachers teach in the classroom. Look, if you tell me as a professor that my job is to get students to bubble in the right answer, you take all the joy and creativity about what it means to be a teacher. And when we get back to this, my vision for Arizona students is that they leave with two things. Number one, a diploma in one hand that indicates what they know, but something else in their other hand that indicates what they can do. That could be a career and technical education certificate, AP credits, proficiency in more than one language. It can be a project, it can be a code, it can be an app. It can be a number of things that get students excited about applying what they've learned to real-world problems. And here's the beautiful part. When we do that, we make our schools great places to teach and learn. And that's what's going to help keep teachers in the classroom, is paying them well and letting them do what they love, and that is go out there to teach.
What would you do specifically to improve our education system?
We got to let teachers teach. There's a number of things we've got to do also, by the way, folks, since we've addressed the teaching part. Number one, we have got to allow our traditional public schools and every school to get more innovative. You may or may not know, but in Central Phoenix, there's the Phoenix Union High School District started a coding academy, computer coding. It's a wonderful place to learn, and students are going to leave that high school ready for great paying jobs. We need more of that. We need more career and technical education, by the way, for students who learn in different ways and are off to different career paths. That is a great way to learn. We've also got to make some structural changes. At the same time that we are fixing schools, we need to rethink how we are designing our schools. In Arizona, if you're a traditional public school, you need a couple thousand students before we build you a high school. That's too big. That's basically a college in lots of ways. We need to find ways for our schools to get smaller so that there is more interaction and connections between teachers and students. That certainly needs to happen. And in the end, like I said, to me, rather than standardized testing, we've got to get students ready for what I think is the best test, and it's this: blank page. Getting students ready to create. To go from a blank page or a blank computer screen to developing something new and creating something new is what's not only going to get them ready for building a brand new economy and changing our economy in Arizona, but like I said, it creates exciting places to teach and learn as well. Those will be the changes, Jim.
My parents were both public school teachers, so growing up, I was born of teachers. I saw how hard they worked. I saw how much they cared about the children in their classroom, the same way they cared about my sister and I. The kind of focus, the kind of money they spent on their supplies to be able to get the classroom going. And by the way, this new tax bill in D.C. will not allow teachers to deduct the money they spend on their supplies, which is absolutely outrageous and just one of many reasons to kill that tax bill out of D.C. But one of the things that really devastated my parents when they were teachers was when a new superintendent would come in and have a new idea for how to teach and then send his henchmen into the classroom to make sure they taught exactly to the T of whatever they said should be done. That devastates a teacher's confidence. Teachers are professionals. Teachers get training and credentials, even though Governor Ducey just signed a bill that would take away credentialing from teachers as a requirement. Another thing we need to roll back when we get in there. But teachers need to be given autonomy to be able to do what they know best, which is to get the best out of each individual kid based on their learning style, their background, and what their interests are. Figure out what that kid's passions are, and then lead them in the right directions and get them inspired. We're all here because a teacher inspired us at some point in our career. That's the reason we're here. So honoring those teachers, making that happen, has got to be what we do. We also need to focus on the physical safety of our classrooms. We have only funded our statutorily required formula of building renewal to our schools at 10% of what it should be for the last 10 years. 10%. So in my daughter's high school, Tucson High, 10% of those classrooms were locked away because they're hazardous to inhabit. There have been classrooms whose roofs have collapsed with kids in them. There have been duct tape literally holding together HVAC systems. We have real basics. If the teachers don't feel safe, if the kids don't feel safe, the learning is going to be compromised. We can fund that as well. We have to get back to the basics and be able to move forward as a state in our education system.
What types of economic development would each of you promote in our state?
Well, that's something near and dear to my heart, because there's a bunch of different ways of going at economic development. And most of them come on down to investing in ourselves instead of simply giving our money away in the form of corporate tax cuts that do nothing for our economy. Investing in an education system for an entire lifetime of learning. You know, we've cut our universities by $2.5 billion since 2009. We need to reinvest in our universities because they're going to invent the industries of the future so that we don't have to bribe them to come here from elsewhere. We can grow our own here in Arizona. We need to invest in our community college system so that when people lose their careers mid-career to automation or globalization, they have a retraining platform to be able to figure out how they can get that next job. We need the lifetime of learning foundation that is K-12. But we also need to invest in our infrastructure. I don't have to tell you that our transportation system is failing in many ways. That's part of why I worked so hard before I was ever an elected official to try to get investment in our transportation infrastructure here in Pima County. We've now invested $2.1 billion over that 20-year plan that no one was able to put in place before we worked together and got this done. And now you just look at downtown, for example. It's a great example of economic development. Downtown Tucson was an utter ghost town with tattoo parlors and seedy bars and secondhand stores. Then we were able to put the streetcar in place, and it was a tough fight. People thought I was crazy when I first started talking about that around 1999, 2000. But I put up my murals downtown. We started focusing on downtown. And I worked together to get people across the aisle to push together for that streetcar. And now we've seen $1.5 billion worth of private development in 3 blocks of a 4-mile route. I ran into some people I knew from Green Valley the other day downtown having a great time because there's 24/7 activity, all different people on the streets, having a fabulous time in downtown Tucson, which never happened before. And I said, how do you like downtown now? And they said, oh yeah, we liked it so much, we sold our house in Green Valley, we live downtown Tucson. Can you believe that? You wouldn't have been able to say that 10 years ago. That's real economic development, and that's what we can create throughout the entire state. And how about that Tucson-Phoenix passenger rail?
David, economic development.
Economic development. Our plan for economic development is pretty straightforward. We are going to encourage businesses to start, build, and stay in Arizona. That is the path. That is how many of our western neighbors have built. San Francisco, for example, Seattle. Look, this idea of encouraging corporations to come to your state is one approach, but by the time you finish with tax cuts and tax credits, they're not investing back. And so areas that have built, Denver's moving in this direction, they have built because they have encouraged businesses to start, build, and stay where they started. And that's going to be our focus. And the way we're going to do this is we cannot separate K-12 and higher education from economic development. If we do that, we're losing. And it's because the way to get businesses to start, build, and stay is you need an investment in human capital, folks. That's the path forward. The path forward is investing in people, in educating people, in giving them that opportunity. It's no secret that, you know what, every time, pick up the paper, I look and I see a new business coming, for example, Phoenix and Tucson, inevitably they're tied to one of the universities. And why are they tied? Because the universities are where you find that human capital. We've got to learn that lesson as a state. I paid close attention to us as a western state from an economic perspective. We are trailing almost all of our western neighbors, all of our western states, except for New Mexico. And the knock on Arizona over and over again is we fail to invest in our people, in human capital. And when we do that, then we're going to get a chance to become a leading economy, not a lagging economy. And we've already talked in our campaign about a commitment for community college tuition, universal community college tuition. We started at the community college because that's where most students begin, but it's also the most direct pathway to middle-class jobs and to economic development. There's a handful of states, mostly, if not all of them, Republican-leaning states that are doing the exact same thing. Why? They recognize that the economic path forward for their state, and it's going to be the same for us, is investing in people as our economy changes, as they get an opportunity to build brand new economies.
How can we improve our interactions with Mexico to improve the flow of trade?
We can elect Garcia for governor. How's that? We want to change our perception of Arizona, not just to Mexico, but beyond. We want to show what we're about in this state. Let's go from 1070 to electing Garcia for governor. It'll go a long way, folks. Yes, I understand we do quite a bit. I know that actually we, the state, it's cities who are doing most of this work, to be frank with you. City of Phoenix, City of Tucson, reaching out to Mexico. But there is a big difference, folks, from reaching out and then communicating to people in the language that they understand and know. You do that, you communicate to somebody's heart, right? So our first intro, what we're going to do, Jim, is win this, and then get down to Mexico personally, have a conversation with them in Spanish, and let them know that Arizona is open for business. And Arizona is not what people say and think it is from the outside. This place is changing. It's a place to invest. It's a place to be in, and we look forward to that relationship. So it's a number one for us. And again, it's something the state needs to do. I do credit the cities for doing a lot of this, but it's always speaking for someone else, and then we pass another bill in Arizona. We're better known for Russell Pierce and Joe Arpaio, for example. And until we change that, it's going to be easy for somebody from the outside to point to Arizona and say, that's not a welcoming place. And again, our best way to do it is to change leadership at the top. And that's what's going to communicate an entirely different message to not only Mexico, but to the rest of the country as well.
Well, my stepdad owns a little tennis shop up by Reed Park called Match Point Tennis. I don't know if any of you have been there. He was just complaining to me the other day that pickleball's taken away all his business. We're competing with a pickleball tournament right now. So if you want to go up and help him out by Reed Park, Albert on Broadway. Pay political announcement. He has told me that 40% of his business comes from legal Mexican residents who come across the border and shop here. I don't have to tell you that. Just go to Elcon Mall, go to Park Place Mall, look at the parking lot. Look at where the license plates are from. At least a third of our southern Arizona economy comes from money from legal Mexican visitors coming up here and spending their money in our stores. The last thing you do is say, we don't want you here, by putting up yet another big wall that does nothing to improve our security. So number one thing you need to do is stand up to Donald Trump. And this governor has not been doing that. This governor, for all his talk about wanting to have good trade, at the same time, he has been an enabler for what Donald Trump has done to try to say we don't want immigrants. And when we look at doing things like deporting dreamers of all people, I believe we are committing an act of evil. We need to stand up for those who have the energy to power our economy in the future. Those who have served our country, those who have worked hard in school and they're now in our universities. We need to give them in-state tuition. We don't need to deport them. Because when you deport a kid who's been here their entire life, and you go send them to a country where they have no support network, and no friends, and no family, you're condemning that kid to death in some cases. Because how can you survive in that situation? It's time to show that we are a welcoming state again. And it's time to stand up to Donald Trump.
Next question to you. Do you support recreational marijuana in the state?
We have far too many people locked up in Arizona prisons for drug offenses. And a lot of those are marijuana. That is not a good use of our money as a state. And the thing is, we don't have a correction system, we have a punishment system. We are not correcting people's behavior. We are putting them away for the profit of a few out-of-state prison corporations. And that's not the way we ought to operate. And I'll tell you, if we had recreational marijuana legalized, I think that would remove a lot of the incentive for any new private prisons in the state. So I think it could be a good move to be able to get us to the point where we no longer incarcerate so many people in our state. Instead, we value them and make them part of our economy. What we need is treatment, not punishment, when it comes to drug offenses. Right now, there are 19,000 people that get released from our prisons every single year. An estimated 70% of them have an active substance abuse problem when they are released. Chances are most of them had that substance abuse problem, and that's what got them in trouble in the first place. Why on earth aren't we treating them all? Because recidivism is cut in half when you do good treatment programs for people coming out of prison. And that means if they're not coming back, they're not committing new crimes, and you have fewer victims, and you have less crime. Unless you have an interest in signing a contract with the private prison industry that guarantees a 90 to 100% occupancy rate, which is what this governor has done. Talk about immoral. So there is an incentive for this governor to lock away as many people as possible to keep the private prison money going. That's not the way we ought to operate this state. Remember the ballot measure for recreational marijuana. The biggest donor against that initiative was the biggest maker in Arizona of opioids. And now that person who donated that money is now facing federal charges of bribery. That's not the people we should be hanging out with.
This is ultimately a question of sentencing and criminal justice reform, folks. And let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to be committed to taking money out of a growing corrections budget and putting it back into education. And when folks say, how are you going to cover that savings? It's going to give us an opportunity to talk about criminal justice reform, closing the school-to-prison pipeline, reducing recidivism, and focusing on prevention. And I think until we tie those two things together, we're going to have a separate sort of social conversation without much meaning to it until we say that there is a direct connection, financial connection, between school-to-prison pipeline, for example, like I said, recidivism and prevention, and the cost and the money we are spending in corrections. And when I say that, folks say, well, the private prisons are going to sue you. And my thought is, look, I would rather be sued by the private prisons than to have our teachers in our schools suing me as governor, which is exactly what's happening right now. So, and that's going to be our focus. It's going to be on, again, this is an issue of, look, I know this from the neighborhood I grew up in. And a lot of young lives are damaged from basically some real inequities in terms of sentencing with respect to how we handle issues like drugs and like marijuana in particular. And so we need to make that commitment. But if it remains, like I said, this again a separate conversation, it's not going to become a meaningful discussion until we tie it to some dollars and cents, and that's what we intend to do. We've got to focus on prevention and education. Those are the two things. We've also got to look for some bad actors out there. It's amazing to me to read doctors who are prescribing literally, I think, millions of pills. So we've got to look out for bad actors. We have got to focus on treatment and education in terms of focus. And last, there are always ties, to be honest with you, between drug and economic development. We've got to have something hopeful for folks to look toward. But ultimately, for me, this is about prevention. This is about education and information. And that's going to be the direction we take.
Thank you, David. Steve.
I used to have a lot of very important skills that used to be useful. And they are completely useless now because of automation. And that's happening to a lot of industries these days. You've heard of self-driving cars, I imagine. There's a lot of them around Arizona right now. There's estimates that probably 10, 15, 20 years from now, we might not be driving anymore. We might subscribe to cars. What happens to the #1 job description for men in this country, which is driver, when there's no longer a job called driver? What happens is, I think, what we're seeing happen in a lot of industries, particularly in the Rust Belt and the manufacturing heart of this country, and all over. When people lose a job mid-career, they lose hope. They lose a sense of self-worth. And many of them have been turning to opioids. I think the whole opioid crisis has a lot to do with despair. We need to offer people hope, we need to people opportunity, and we need to offer people retraining so they can have a decent way of creating a decent living if their entire job disappears. That's crucial. One thing you don't do is go to a so-called miracle wonder drug called Vivitrol, which Governor Ducey got into place, which costs about $1,700 a dose, that's supposed to cure addiction, but happened to have been lobbied by one of his best friends, a guy named Jim Norton, who's now under indictment for bribery. There's no magic solution to this one. It takes hard work, it takes effort, it takes all of us coming together to prevent the entire need and raise our country up so we feel like there's hope for all of us, not just the 99.999% who own the robots. I have 2 daughters. I do not want this legislature telling them what they can or can't do with their bodies. And now that they're going to stuff like messing around with our ability to be able to even choose birth control, I mean, they have already gone after any ability to provide an abortion in this state in every way possible, particularly hurting people in rural areas and people in high poverty areas. And then they started going after, there actually was a bill that went through, it was struck down in court by Planned Parenthood, thank goodness, that would have required the abortion pill to be used with an on-label old usage that wasn't accurate for what we'd be doing. It could actually harm the women it was administered to. Luckily, that was thrown out. Kathy Herod is the director of the Center for Arizona Policy. She's the one who is also behind SB 1062 that would allow businesses to discriminate against LGBTQ people. She has been trying to push every possible way to roll back women's control over their reproductive health and all health. And Governor Ducey does everything she wants. She practically has an office in the 9th floor of the governor's tower. So she can be right there whenever he needs to ask for what to do. That has to stop. All of these restrictions on women's ability to control their own bodies and what they do with their lives will be rolled back once I am governor and once we are able to move these things forward. We cannot allow Kathy Herod to control this state anymore. Thank you.
To begin with, we need to ensure that women are making their decisions over their bodies. That is absolutely crucial. And I've been supported by Planned Parenthood and look forward to having them continue to support me. But I want to get a bit more foundational. And that is, we've got to get back to comprehensive sex education so that folks understand up front. You know, people think that the purpose to go to school is to learn. And that's actually not the purpose, in my opinion, of school or something like sex education. Kids learn outside of school. They learn outside of school. What you need is a place for them to go understand what they've learned. And that's the purpose of comprehensive sex education. This is not about learning that there's birds and bees and outside of schools that there's this, you know, that there's plenty of talk there. You can learn it there. And by the way, a lot of misinformation out there. But the purpose of sex education, comprehensive sex education, is for young people to have a place to understand, to make good decisions early, to be well informed, to know what their options are, to know the implications of the decisions they're about to make, and to really get away from much of the stigma. Because students, like I said, are being exposed, and we've got to find a way, in my opinion, to get to education so that we address this issue foundationally. And in addition to making sure that when they're adults, they have access to quality health care and can make their own decisions. I think we begin this with a better understanding of sex education in schools.
What would you do to ensure Arizona has a sustainable supply of water far into the future?
This issue is the one that keeps me up at night, folks. This is one that in Arizona I think we can address many of these issues. Natural resources and scarcity of natural resources is a significant issue. And first and foremost, we need to do a few things. Number one, we need to begin talking about this issue much more forthrightly. We're not having a public discussion about the use of water, for example, and the Republicans can't have this discussion. It goes back to the climate change denial that you mentioned, Jim, coming in, and making sure that we're focusing on more discussions about water conservation, the role of water in Arizona, and that is extremely important to begin talking about our resources. We also need to continue to make sure we're playing our role in water agreements, interstate water agreements, as well as working with our tribes as well, who have water rights available to them, so ensuring that Arizona gets their fair share. But more particularly, we've got to continue to think about how we're using water and understanding the implications of using water in Arizona. And it is about finding incentives and ways for communities to make better use of their water resources. It is about understanding how to use reclaimed water as much as possible and doing the very best with our most scarce resource here in Arizona, and that's water.
As climate change moves on, and we know that climate change is causing droughts already, and it's going to cause worse droughts in the future, we're right here on the front lines of that. So we have to be talking about water and how we're going to work together to be able to solve these problems. There's a lot of different users of water. And all of them have different perspectives and different interests. So the only way that we'd be able to solve this water issue as we look at an impending crisis is for all of us to have a public process and work together on it to figure out how we can get things done. I know we can learn a lot from all of us in Southern Arizona because we have been very good at using less residential water than a lot of other parts of the state. We can share that information with other people. What you don't do is have a secret process of insiders handpicked by the governor to figure out some way of doing a complicated political scheme that somehow benefits his political future. And that's exactly what's going on right now. Governor Ducey has been meeting in secret with certain people at the table while excluding others, including the Central Arizona Project. And he's going to come up with a package of quote-unquote reforms based on those secret discussions in this next session. One of the things he's talking about is taking away our ability to elect the board of the Central Arizona Project and making it a governor appointee for him. And he's apparently trying to do some sort of a deal where he spins in a whole bunch of other stuff. And again, it's not him, it's his chief of staff, Kirk Adams, who's doing this, because Governor Ducey will read the talking points once Kirk has decided what the policy is. But the idea that our water future is being decided by a few people handpicked by this governor who is much more interested in impressing his DC conservative friends and becoming president of the United States than governing Arizona is reprehensible. And another reason why this governor needs to be replaced.
Start with you on this one. It's a question from the audience. What can be done to stop the Rosemont mine?
Well, it's funny we ask this right after water, because that's one thing that can be done to stop the Rosemont mine. Ultimately, I think the water impacts of the Rosemont mine are probably the most disturbing here. When you consider what that might do to the water in this vicinity and the availability of it, or the quality of it, I think there's some real problems with it. So I think the most important thing is to try to go to the public meetings that you have been doing, and make sure that you can argue with the federal government as much as you can. I'm very concerned with now that the federal government is in control of somebody who doesn't seem to admit that there is any value to the environment besides resource extraction, that we may not have a fair hearing at the federal government. So a lot of that is in the federal hands, and that's going to be tough. But to have a governor that's actually going to advocate for clean water and the preservation of our environment and our tourism industry, I think is going to help a lot for us to be able to argue with the federal government about making sure that those things are protected, both here and elsewhere.
You know, this idea of the mine, and I got to back this also into what's going on up in Navajo Nation, for example, and at the Grand Canyon. What you get this argument is that we're in such a scarcity, we've got to do this. And it's not the case, folks. It is about finding new answers and new economies. That's what we need to do, so that we are finding ways to build our economy. And this is moving, by the way, from traditional economies to new economies. And up in Navajo Nation, I had a very good conversation with them as their coal mine is closing down. We need to have a just transition for everybody up there working, so that the argument that we need these resources today, we've got to pull them out now, it doesn't play, because it's an economic argument. It's almost like a knee-jerk argument that we've got to give folks another option, and other options to grow their economy, other options to build jobs, other than tearing down our precious and really, in my opinion, we can't go back from tearing down our natural resources. And so it's a broader discussion about finding new economies, new ways, new opportunities for rural Arizona. Internet, by the way, up in Navajo Nation, to give you one example, is another good option. There's a lot of good economic opportunities over there. When you talk about those economic opportunities, then the push for something like a mine in that area or other areas starts to dissipate, because now they see other options. Rather than one option that really is more of a scorched earth option that I think is just basically bad for the long-term health of Arizona.
How could you as governor respond to the immigration and refugee restrictions being imposed by the president to make the impacts less harsh for AZ immigrants and refugees?
This is a country built on immigrants, folks. This is a state built on immigrant labor. The United States is in such a wonderful position because we have a net increase of people coming here who are talented and hardworking, and we've got to continue to keep ourselves open to that talent. It has built so much of our state. And as governor, we need to find every option available to make sure that our immigrants and refugees are welcomed here in Arizona. We are doing our part. And a big player in this are local communities, churches, cities, by the way, who do the frontline work with the immigrant community and making sure that they are supported. Making sure that they have the resources that they need and can bring in and welcome the immigrant community as they enter. We've got to continue to invite and make sure that those resources are coming into Arizona. And as a governor, I believe that a lot of this is very, very local. We've got to allow folks at the local level to have that flexibility and that autonomy within their communities. And it's about supporting community organizations, cities, churches, and others that are working in this area.
Well, in November 2015, before we had this president, back when we thought we would never have this president, Governor Ducey issued a statement where he said, "We don't want any more refugees in Arizona." I was personally horrified. I'd worked with refugees' families for some time. I understood that these were people who had already extreme vetting. Some of them have been waiting for 20, 25 years to come from a country in which they were fleeing from terror. These were not terrorists. These were people fleeing from terror and finally having an opportunity to come to the country they had dreamed of, where they had the opportunity to start over and create a life in peace and opportunity. And then they were hearing from Governor Ducey, as they're about to come into Arizona, that we don't want them here. That's not American. That's not who we are as a country. The Statue of Liberty is one of our most precious symbols as a country. So I created a group on Facebook called Arizona Welcomes Refugees. And we started, there were like 8 of us, and we went to a church and we made signs that simply said, "Welcome," in Arabic and in Swahili and different languages. And we went and we figured out who was coming to the airport when. We went to the airport and there were a bunch of us there just holding signs welcoming them. Then we started bringing fruit baskets and things. Then we started having potlucks where all the refugee families were coming together with us older Americans to learn about what their needs were and what we were doing. And we offered donations to them at those potlucks. And then we created a group, created a thing called the Syrian Sweet Sales. Because a lot of these families, they needed to start paying back their travel within 6 months of arrival, and they didn't have very good language skills, and they cooked really well. So we set up the Syrian Sweet Sale. The first one sold out in half an hour. There were 12 families, 500 people showed up. The next one was 5 days later. It sold out in an hour and a half. There were 24 families, and 700 people showed up. It was them getting the cash they needed to pay things back, start their lives in America on the right foot, and contribute to our economy, while the people who came and bought from them understood, this may have been the first time they'd ever met a Muslim. And they understood they're not terrorists. They're people just like them. That's the way you build community. And that's the way you build a strong America. Not by saying, "No, we don't want you here."
All right, Steve, this one to you. What is your plan to improve Arizona's infrastructure, and how do you plan to fund it?
Remember that Tucson to Phoenix passenger rail? It's going to happen. And it's going to be Guaymas to Tucson to Phoenix to Vegas. We actually have. Yeah, did you like that? We can do public-private partnerships for that type of model. There are actually large amounts of equity capital out there or in the world looking for places to do safe long-term investments. In part, it's because our top tax rate as a country is no longer 90%, like it was when we were building infrastructure ourselves in the 50s. Now it's down to 39%. And the whole merits of that aside, there's a lot of money out there looking to invest in places. If we invest in something like a passenger rail, a high-speed rail along that route, we could get casinos to invest in it, for example. They could make their money back just from the $20 martinis they'd sell on board. And it would create infrastructure and jobs. Every $1 billion you spend on transportation infrastructure creates 19,000 new, good, high-wage jobs. And yet we've been stealing money from our gas taxes and giving it away. So we can fund it ourselves. We can make these things happen. Our gas tax hasn't been increased since 1991. And now we're not even using gas in a lot of our vehicles. So we need to find a new sustainable way of being able to create a sustainable funding source. So this transportation infrastructure system that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents built and really suffered and sacrificed to build We can't let that fall apart on our watch because we don't have the guts to figure out how to sustainably fund it. We need to make sure people have the freedom and the liberty to get around, and that means we have to have an excellent transportation system, public transit and roadways alike. So we're going to find a way to be able to make that happen. We can work across the aisle to be able to find the sources for it, and we're going to be able to put people to work by building that infrastructure and creating a better economy for all the businesses who will come here. Now they'll have a workforce that's trained and a transportation infrastructure that's excellent.
And it comes down to three things that we're going to be committed to doing. Number one, fixing roads, investing and getting money back into HERF funds so that rural Arizona can fix roads. Second, it is about fixing collapsing schools, particularly all over the state, but in rural Arizona. And third, it is about changing the economic situation to allow reliable internet in parts of Arizona so that they can participate in today's economy. Those are going to be the three cornerstones of looking and focusing on infrastructure for me. And how we're going to get there, and how we're going to get anywhere, by the way, in all these issues, is really a combination of three things. It is, and we need every single tool available to us to make all of this happen. Infrastructure investment, for example, education, healthcare. And the three tools available to us is, number one, closing corporate loopholes. And a lot of folks in the legislature know where those are and how to do it. There's been a lot of discussion of that. We've got to make sure that happens. Second, we've got to close tax credits. Those have been expanding in Arizona. Last count I saw, over $400 million in some tax credit. You can't pass new law or new taxes in Arizona, but lobbyists can get tax credits over and over again, and we've got to close that. And particularly in education, those are just simply inequitable. Rich schools get more than poor schools, and we've got to stand up and say that that is no longer fair. And third, we have got to be in a position to raise revenue and say that we need to raise taxes in Arizona. It was the very first question I was asked, and I said, yes, I would be open to it. Because if we're going to address these issues and close the hole that we know is out there, folks, we've got to have every tool available to us. Now, we've got to make sure that it's not regressive, so that the sales tax does two things. We know that it's harder on working families, and we know it's more volatile. But it is finding creative ways, particularly for the wealthiest of our state, to pay their fair share, so that we have the dollars available to do all the things we're talking about up here. And when we do that, I think folks are going to see, what you hear is when that happens, Arizona's going to go off the cliff economically. That's not what's going to happen. That investment's going to turn back around and continue to build this state. And look at Proposition 206, minimum wage. Arizona's continue to grow, and you'll see the same thing with an infrastructure investment.
Finally at our closing statements. David, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. You didn't play pickleball. I appreciate that. I understand it's very popular, so thank you for being here. Look, folks, I am running because I know the numbers are out there to win. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this. And the secret, the path for Arizona is two things. And I'll say it again. It is about brand new energy coming on board. We've got to make sure we bank that. But when Arizona turns and doesn't come back, it's when we bring in a different population, disenfranchised population of Arizona, parts of Arizona that don't vote in big numbers. We look at what happened in Virginia. We're very excited about that, right? Yes. But what happened in Virginia was college-educated folks voted at a higher rate, but so did a lot of urban areas of Virginia. And we have reliable voters there. Latinos voted 7-3 for the Republican candidate, probably the Democratic candidate, wrong side. African Americans 8-2, 9-1. It is those populations that are reliable Democratic voters that when we get them on board and they stay with us and they're active and participating, not only do we win, we begin to govern in a way that can change Arizona. And that is our focus in the campaign. Like I mentioned, we have tremendous support already, 1,200 people involved. We got a majority of our elected officials who have jumped on board. We have governing board members from across Arizona who have jumped on board. All of that energy is getting out to brand new net voters, adding them to the energy in this room, turning Arizona around, and then never turning back. That is our plan, not only to win, but to continue to govern. I hope you're going to be part of that. Pay attention to our campaign. You're going to see we are bringing brand new energy in, added energy to what we're doing so that we can win this thing and get it done. And like I said, don't turn back. Thank you.
Is this a great time to be a Democrat? I mean, it's always a great time to be a Democrat. But right now, we have an opportunity like we've never seen. Every time Donald Trump sends out a tweet, there's another Democrat born. But we can't rely on that alone. We are going to have to double down and do everything we can to ride that energy towards a victory next November and towards a governor who can govern from day one. I've won 6 campaigns in a row. I know how to win in Arizona. I've been all over the state all the time. I've already been to Flagstaff 9 times this June. I've been to Kingman twice, Yuma 5 times. I'm getting all over this place, and I am seeing people from across the political spectrum wanting change in Arizona. There are rural Republican superintendents who are furious with Governor Ducey for that voucher bill and for chopping their public schools because they don't have private schools to benefit. They have public schools that get screwed over. It used to be that Republicans and Democrats and independents alike were proud of our good public schools. We were some of the best in the country in the 60s and 70s. And there's a lot of folks that want to get back there, of all parties. We actually have the opportunity of creating a consensus governor who's focused on the basics: education infrastructure, healthcare, transportation infrastructure, and jobs. Those aren't partisan things. And if you talk to people the right way about those things, you can convert them. We actually have an opportunity to elect a governor who has more experience than any governor in recent memory at working with the legislature on both sides. We have an opportunity to be able to push policy forward, a governor who understands that policy. But I can't do it without you. Go out there and tell 10 friends, 10 family members, that there is hope for this state. Don't give up on us. Work for one more year. We can turn this around, but we have to do it together. So go to farleyforarizona.com, go tell all your friends, have them tell more friends. We're going to be able to have the money to compete with the Koch brothers, but we're also going to need everybody doing word of mouth, so when they start lying about me on TV, no one will believe them. So do your part, and we will turn the state around. There's hope for our state. Let's win.
All right. Let's have a big round of applause for both our candidates here. Bring out Ann Stryker, the chair of Alliance for Action, down here to close out our wonderful event.
Well, big thank you to Jim for doing a great job. I know we've been so excited about both of you coming down here. Steve and David, thank you so much. And I think you can see when you look out at this crowd how much excitement there is in making this election Democratic this year. This election of the new governor is very, very important to our state. I think the questions that were asked touch on all the subjects, or many of the subjects that are important to all of us. We have some really great political organizations that are working together. Big thanks to DCSRA, to the Quail Creek Democratic Group, and also to the Alliance for Actions, electing progressive candidate group led by Miriam and Sherry. Big thank you to all of those folks for putting this on for us. Now the good news is that David and Steve have agreed to stick around and answer any other questions that you might have. If you want to shake their hands, show them your support. They'll be here for a while afterward. I think the time is now, folks. I think the time to look at the 2018 gubernatorial election is in our hands. It is very, very important. We also have a couple of other important elections that we're going to be focusing on in the next few months. So to all of you, I ask you, let's stay engaged, let's stay active, let's be loud as we can as we head into 2018. We need all hands on board working together. So thank you all for staying here, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the voting booths.
Come here, make me feel more like a... Except for the governor's one.